All right, we're ready for Revelation chapter 13 and our survey through the book of Revelation. And in this, we are looking into the second section of the book, which starts in chapter 12. We are dealing with chapters 12 to 14, which deals with the war. And we'll summarize those three chapters, 12, 13, and 14, in a moment. But I want to back up to some things we said last week to understand, if you were not here, the setting of chapters 12 to 14 as it pertains to 12 through 22 as it pertains to 1 through 11. Chapters 1 through 11 describes things on earth. Chapters 12 to 22 describes things from heaven's point of view. 1 through 11 was describing a struggle on earth. The conflict between Rome, the Roman Empire, the Roman emperor, and Christians. Whereas chapters 12 to 22 describe things from the spiritual realm. That really there is a conflict not between Rome and Christians as there is between God and Satan. So it is the things that we find in chapters 12 to 22 that drive and cause the struggle on earth of chapters 1 through 11. We also see, as we get into chapter 14, the victory from the vantage point of heaven. In contrast, we saw in chapters 1 through 11, there will be victory from the vantage point of the Christian and things on earth. But there's ultimately victory from the vantage point of heaven, and we see that in 12 to 22. So that's the relationship of these two major sections of the book. Now, let's get into looking at 12 to 14. Last week in chapter 12, what did we see? 12, 13, and 14 deal with a war. What do we see in chapter 12? So, the woman and the dragon at war. Who or what is the dragon? That's Satan, identified as Satan, verse 9, the devil. And the woman, there was the woman mentioned in verses 1 and 2. And then we see the woman later in 13 to 17. Who is or what is the woman? The people of God, the remnant of God, coming out of the Old Testament into the New Testament. And what is the dragon trying to do? He tried to destroy first, before he attacks the woman, her male child. And in that he failed in that, now he's turning his attention to the woman, which is the people of God. And so that was the last scene we saw in chapter 12. Now chapter 13 relates to that. Chapter 13 deals with two beasts. There's a beast on earth and there's a beast in the sea. In fact, mentioned in reverse order there. Let's skip that because that's what we're dealing with today. And in chapter 14, what's chapter 14 say concerning this war? If you studied with us before, we gave a chapter title to chapter 14. If you wrote it in your Bible, what does it say? All right, yeah, dealing with the redeemed, the victorious Lamb. The Lamb is victorious. And so here's victory in this war. So there's war between Satan and God's people. How does he carry that out? Well, chapter 13 tells us how. How he's doing that. He's doing it through the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth. And we'll see more about that as we go along. So chapter 12 dealt with the woman and the dragon at war. As that chapter ends, he is set to devour, if he can, the woman. And now we get to chapter 13 and in verse 1. There is a textual issue here. And when we get through with this textual issue, by that I'm talking about whether we're talking about the minority text or the majority text. And so as I read my translation, and if you're reading from a different translation, you said mine reads different. In fact, a lot different. And if I read from that translation, you say my King James and New King James reads quite different. It's a textual issue, minority versus majority text. When we get through with that, and I'm going to mention what that conflict is, when we get through, it makes really no difference. The point of the chapter is going to be the same. But anyway, be that as it may. Someone who has Drew, you have the English Standard? Who has English Standard? You got it, Kevin? Read that for me in just a minute. Get ready to read verse 1. Anyway, verse 1 says, "Then I stood on the sand of the sea." Then I stood. This is John. as per the King James, New King James. Other translations, which are based on the minority text, have it he stood. And the last he we saw was the dragon. And so this may have reference, and I say may, if you favor that minority rendering, this may have reference to the dragon. And some commentators picture that now as the dragon standing on the seashore seeing what's going to happen next. And he looks to the sea and John sees what happens. There's a beast that rises out of the sea, and then there's a beast of the earth. We'll talk about who and what they are in a moment. But as this text renders that, and the King James renders that, which is based on the majority text, it is rendering it as if John saw it. It doesn't make a big difference, but read the English Standard Version at verse 1. Follow in yours to see how it differs, because it takes part of chapter 12 and incorporates that with this as if this is supposed to be part of that, connects with that last verse. Go ahead.
And I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads.
All right. There was something else I'm looking. Maybe that wasn't it. Is it the New American Standard that takes part of chapter NIV? But there was another one there. I was thinking it was the English Standard that rendered that. But it takes the last phrase of chapter 12 and incorporates it here. Some suggest that the first part of verse 1 actually is the ending of chapter 12. It doesn't make any difference when we get through concerning this beast. I'm just suggesting to you there's a reason why your translation may read just a little bit different. All right. What I'm going to see here is the beast of the sea, verses 1 through 10. 11 to 18 is the beast of the earth. Both of these, just from a cursory reading of chapter 13, are allies of Satan. We saw Satan in chapter 12. Both of these are allies of Satan. Now, before we get into let's talk about the beast of the sea. Key verse, I've tried to give a key verse to each chapter. Verse 18, I think, would be a summary of that. Concerning the beast of the sea and the beast of the earth, the number is 666. And we'll talk about the significance of that a little bit later. All right, let's talk about the beast and the use of beast in apocalyptic literature. Let's go back to Daniel for a moment. So one of the questions is, who or what is the beast that are mentioned here? So let's go to Daniel 7. Our familiarity with Daniel will help us to better understand Revelation, period, but it'll help us understand Revelation chapter 13. Beasts were used by Daniel and by God through Daniel in Daniel 7 to represent world empires and emperors. For example, in Daniel 7, look at verse 3, there were 4 great beasts that came up from the sea. So now, let's pause and go in your mind over to Revelation 13, and there was a sea, and there were beasts coming out of the sea. Some connection, some familiarity. Beast rising out of the sea. Now, let's stop and talk about the sea just for a moment. The sea seems to represent the mass of humanity. That there was the stirring of the great sea, verse 2, and out of the sea rose these 4 beasts, which represents 4 world empires. And so there was the lion representing the Babylonian Empire. There is the bear representing the Medo-Persian Empire. There's the leopard, the Grecian Empire. And then there's the 4th beast, which would be the Roman Empire. There's 2 things I want you to see. One is the sea seems to represent in Daniel the mass of humanity. And out of the mass of humanity, society, rises these 4 empires or 4 kingdoms or 4 great emperors who rule. And Daniel uses that terminology. Well, Revelation uses the term sea. We saw it in chapter 8, we saw it in chapter 10, we see it in chapter 12, and here in 13 and in verse 1, and we're not through. We'll see it again in chapter 20 and chapter 21. And rising out of that mass of humanity comes beast. Now, those are not literal beasts, but they represent seemingly some empire. Now, I want you to notice in Daniel, still in Daniel, we haven't left it. Let's go to Daniel 7:23. I'm trying to set for you the basis for which we think that the beast would represent, in this context, the Roman Empire, the Emperor Domitian, if our dating be correct. And so notice 7 in verse 23, there was the fourth beast that shall be the fourth kingdom on earth. And so there was this beast that represented the fourth kingdom, which was the Roman Empire. Now let's go back to Revelation 13. So what I've tried to establish, I know I'm not giving you a chance to talk. I'm trying to lay some foundation here. And what I'm trying to picture for you is the sea seemingly represented the mass of humanity. Out of that comes beasts or kingdoms in Daniel. Those reading, the first recipients reading that, being familiar with Old Testament terminology, began to see this is the mass of humanity that produces these beasts. And in context, this must have reference to the Roman Empire, and maybe more particularly Domitian as its emperor. And how do I know that? Well, let's look at some keys here. In chapter 13, whatever or whoever this beast of the sea is, that's where we are now, verses 1 to 10. He was a tool of Satan. Look at verse 2. Now the beast, which I saw was like a leopard, etc., and the dragon gave him power. So he's a tool of Satan, number one. Number two, he accepts worship, verse 4. The Roman emperor did accept worship. There was emperor worship. Therein is the conflict in Revelation. Thirdly, he has power for a limited time, verse 5, for 42 months, or that's 1,260 days, or 3.5 years, or times time and a half a time. And fourthly, he was a powerful ruler over every tribe, tongue, and nations, verse 7. That well describes, in context, well describes the Roman Empire. Make sense? All right. So now let's move through our outline here. So let's go to our questions. And let's go to question number 3. What is the description of the beast of the sea?
Like a leopard, we talked what bear is alive.
All right, he's compared to a leopard. He's compared to a bear, compared to a lion. What other descriptions before that? 7 heads, 10 horns, 10 crowns on one of his horns, and he had a blasphemous name. All right, let's work through those. Those were the descriptions. So let's look at verses 1 to 3a. Here's the description of the beast. What's he like? Well, he rose out of the sea, which we've already defined. He had 7 heads and 10 horns and 10 crowns on his head and a blasphemous name. Now we'll come to verse 2 in a moment. Let's get those first 4 descriptions. The idea of the 7 heads now, as we've mentioned in our introduction to Revelation, we cannot be dogmatic about some symbolism in apocalyptic literature, but that may refer to the wisdom with which he executes his purpose and his mission. Some suggest that it may refer to his durability. In that, verse 3 mentions, and we'll come to this in a moment, who or what that is, that there was one head that was, how's it worded here? Mortally wounded, and a deadly wound, and was healed. And so some suggest that refers to the 7 heads, his durability. He lasts for a while, but he doesn't last forever, according to verse 5. The 10 horns may indicate the great power, that he has great power. The 10 crowns on one of the horns may suggest the authority and the ruling over many. Look at verse 7. And authority was given to him over every tribe and every tongue and every nation. Now the blasphemous name is a little more obvious. What would be the blasphemous name? He claimed to be God. Remember that one of the issues, or not one, that the main issue concerning the emperor worship was they were to burn incense. All citizens were to burn incense and say, Caesar is Lord, and claim he is their ruler. For Rome, that was political allegiance, unity of the kingdom. But for the Christian, it was blasphemy to say he's Lord. And so he wears the name of the Supreme Lord God, or Caesar is Lord. And that well describes what was going on with Domitian and even Nero before him. Now, he's compared at verse 2. He saw him, he was like a leopard, and his feet were like that of a bear, and his mouth was like that of a lion. What would the first century recipient of this letter immediately think about? You might think of Satan. Reference in Daniel. Yeah, let's go back to Daniel. Do you remember in Daniel 7 the beast that rose out of the sea? Let's go back to Daniel 7 for a moment. And notice the beast in Daniel 7. There was one, verse 4, like a lion. There was one, verse 5, like a bear. There was another, verse 6, like a leopard. And so he's using terminology from Old Testament concepts of the power and the fierceness and the viciousness of these kingdoms. I think perhaps verse 2 of our text may be simply telling us the fierce and the vicious way in which he's carrying out the mission of Satan. And so this beast representing the Roman Empire, or Domitian, is carrying out the mission of the dragon with the fierceness of a lion and a bear and of a leopard. Now then, verse 3 is controversial, and I must say difficult. That one of the heads, I saw one of the heads as if it had been mortally wounded, and his deadly wound was healed. And we're going to stop there because I think part B of that verse goes with the next section of being followers. Who or what does that refer to? Well, commentators differ, and I'm not going to throw that open for just open discussion just yet. Haley suggests, he quotes from an author, Peters I think was his name, who said there were 10 varying interpretations of that. I don't know what all 10 are, and I'm not interested in all 10. But there are multiple interpretations of who or what that refers to. Now, for what that may be worth to us, the more common concept among commentators, one commentator suggested that most interpreters see this as a reference having to do with a well-known and popular legend that was widespread in Asia Minor, that at the end of the first century when John wrote the Revelation, of the survival and the return of Nero. And then the author suggests that in our view, John is using this well-known public fantasy to depict Domitian as a resurrected Nero. Not that he was the resurrected Nero, but perhaps playing into that. I'll leave that to you to determine. It seems that he's referring to some power that seemingly was lost, some authority that was lost in the demise of a previous ruler, a previous leader that is survived or resurrected with the current circumstance with Domitian. So it looked like nothing could be any worse than under the rulership of Nero. And now Domitian is in power, if our dating be correct. Haley suggests, Homer Haley in his work, suggests the death of Nero dealt a severe blow to the empire, which was immediately thrown into a 2-year state of anarchy and confusion. And order was later restored. But to the church, which is John's interest, the healing of the death stroke came in the revival and the persecution under Domitian. I don't know what else to do with that. But it seems to be something, some power, some influence, some leader had diminished in power, and that seems to be revived as if he came back to life. Not that Nero died and he was resurrected. That's not the point. But the principles of Nero were resurrected under the leadership of Domitian. Now, say again? In the Roman government. You're right. Help us out, Harry.
There's a possibility that what he's looking at is akin to what's pointed out in 2 Thessalonians, that this
Absolutely. Good point. Let's talk about the followers now, verses 3 to 4, and we'll jump to verse 8. Verse 3, at the end of verse 3, 3b, and all of the world marveled and followed the beast. By all of the world, I think it's just simply the majority of the people in the Roman Empire. Not every single person. The Christians weren't following him and weren't, in other words, they followed him and burned incense and they would say Caesar is Lord. Verse 4, they worshiped the dragon who gave authority to the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying that who is like the beast, who's able to make war against him. What's that mean? That the Roman Empire is, somebody just paraphrase that, what that's saying. The Roman Empire, Domitian, is so powerful that nobody can touch him or bring him down. This is powerful. And they worship him. Now, verse 18, later we see more about verse 8, I'm sorry, not verse 18. And all who dwell on the earth will worship him, and whose name is not written in the book of life, slain from the foundation of the world. So the world worships him. Who worships him? Those whose names are not written in the book of life. That is, those who are faithful to God, those who are faithful Christians. Now, let's talk about his mission, verses 5 to 7. What do we see about the mission? All right. To make war on the saints. Look at verse 5. He was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and given authority to continue for 42 months. Now, let's talk about that just for a moment. Let's go back to Daniel 7 again. And notice that the kingdom of Rome, the emperor of Rome, according to Daniel 7:23, or verse 25, excuse me, that he would speak pompous words against the Most High. And in context, he's dealing with that fourth beast, which is the Roman Empire. Speak pompous words from on high, claiming to be Lord, claiming to be the Lord God of all. Now, what's the significance of him continuing in this authority for 42 months? If you hadn't read anything before this may be confusing, but because of your study of thus far in Revelation and of Old Testament, what does the 42 months suggest to us? An undetermined amount of time. It's the same as the 1,260 days, 3.5 years, 42 months. It just simply means an incomplete, indefinite period of time. It's half of 7. And so his power and his rule and reign is not unlimited. He's going to come to an end. There's going to be victory. Now, notice he was given, at verse 5, that he was given power by the dragon, which suggests he's simply a tool of Satan. That's all he is. He's a tool of Satan. Anything else on his, he was given authority, verse 7, to make war with the saints and overcome them. So here is the dragon at war with the woman, who are the saints that we saw in chapter 12. And now here's the tool through whom he's doing that. He's doing that through the tentacles of the Roman Empire, and we'll see more about that in the next section here. All right, now let's talk about the defeat, verses 9 and 10, and then verse 18. What do you see in verse 10 particularly about the defeat? In this vision, John sees a tool arising out of the sea. There is a beast that's the tool of Satan, and he seems to be all powerful, seems to be almighty. Some are saying no one can ever war against him, no one can ever bring him down. And what he sees at verse 10 is those that lead into captivity, that would be Rome, wouldn't it? They're going to be defeated. They're going to go into captivity. And he that kills with a sword, that'd be Rome, will also be killed with a sword. In other words, this mighty, powerful beast, Rome, is coming down. It's going to fall. We'll get the rest of verse 10 in a second. Go to verse 18. The number of the beast is 666. We'll say more about that in a moment. I'm not going to stop right now and define that, but it just simply means collapse and failure. And we'll leave it at that till we get to verse 18 in a moment. Now let's go back to the end of verse 10. Here is the patience and faith of the saints. You might underline that. That's an important phrase. What's that saying? All right. First Revelation 2:10 alludes to that same principle. Be faithful unto death.
You endure what's going on with the persecution of Rome, that you will be saved in the end.
All right. The patience refers to endurance. The English Standard renders that here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. In other words, understanding this picture that's just been described, that Satan and the tools of Satan, whatever and whoever they may be, are going to ultimately fail. Understanding that will cause the saints to have endurance and have stronger faith. Does that make sense? So those who read the book, I'm talking about, well, it should work for us, but I'm talking about the first recipients who are under the pressure of persecution should read the book, and if they understood it, their faith should be stronger and their endurance be greater. Make sense? Herein is the faith and the patience of the saints. Stop and get a practical lesson here. Do you see the connection between endurance and faith? They go together, don't they? So one who doesn't endure, finish my sentence, doesn't have strong faith. So if I make my faith stronger, my endurance is going to be greater. Make sense? And where do we get that faith? Through the Word of God. All right. That's the beast of the sea. Now let's move to the beast of the earth, verses 11 to 18. We won't spend as much time with this because this perhaps in some ways is a little clearer. And besides that, we don't have the time. We're running out of time. So, who or what is this beast that's described here in verses 11 to 18? Well, there are two things that help identify him. Look at verse 12. Let's get ahead of ourselves to verse 12. He works under the authority, whoever or whatever this beast is. Let's just erase all preconceived ideas. Whatever or whoever this is works under the authority of the first beast, and he exercises all the authority of the first beast. So he's under the authority of the first beast, which we have identified as the Roman Empire or Domitian. Secondly, verse 12 and verse 15 suggest his mission is to enforce the worship of the first beast. Look at verse 12. And causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast. So down to verse 15. Granted him power to give breath to the image of the beast, and the image of the beast should speak and cause many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So that leads us to believe that this represents some arm of the Roman government. That here is the Roman Empire that is going to enforce emperor worship. Domitian himself is not going around at every community doing that. But there has to be some arm of the Roman government. One writer, Ray Summers, suggests that all of these characteristics seem to identify the second beast as the concilia set up in Asia Minor to enforce state religion. And so you may never, if you were a first century Christian living under the rule of Domitian, you may never have seen Domitian, but you're going to see some of the underlings come and put pressure on you to say Caesar is Lord. And if you don't say Caesar is Lord, you may be burned at the stake. And so what about those? What about those? They seem to be the beast of the earth. Now let's go to question number 4, the description of this beast. All right. Yes, he exercises all authority. The first, I'm reading at verse 2. And, I need to be at verse 11. That the beast coming up out of the earth had 2 horns and like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. The lamb may suggest some religious nature of the beast. Because, if our understanding be correct, he's enforcing state religion. That may be the idea. Some may have the idea that it gives the idea of some innocence, but be that as it may, probably enforcing state religion. The 2 horns may suggest limited power in contrast to the Lamb of God, who had 7 horns in chapter 5, verse 6. The voice of the dragon seems to show that he's speaking with the authority of Satan, who is that dragon in the previous chapter, chapter 12. So whenever this arm of the Roman government is enforcing emperor worship, he's simply a tool of Satan, ultimately, and enforcing religion, and has yet limited power according to God. Now let's talk about the mission and work, which carries us through the end of the chapter till we get to verse 18. And I want to save some time to get to verse 18 here in just a moment. What do we see about his mission, this beast?
Primarily it's worship.
Yeah. Let's get that at verse 12. If you don't get anything else about the mission of this beast of the earth, look at verse 12. He exercises all the authority of the first beast and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast. And so emperor worship, in other words. Verse 15, we see the same thing. How does he accomplish that? By deceit. Look at verse 13. He performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven in the sight of men. He deceives those who dwell on the earth by these signs which he is granted to do in the sight of the beast, telling those who dwell on the earth to make an image of the beast, etc. And we'll come back to that as time permits in a moment. These signs are deceptive signs. For lack of time, and in interest of time, I just referenced Exodus 7. There were those Pharaoh's magicians who could work wonders and signs, but didn't measure up to the signs of God. Matthew 24 said there would be false prophets who would show great signs and wonders and deceive many. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, there would be those who had signs. Some commentators refer to that as fake signs, deceptive signs. Others refer to it as what we think of as magic. It's not real miracles, but it's deceptive. It may be more descriptive, not so much of the supposed signs as it is just the deceptive nature of the work. Perhaps even influencing some to say Caesar is Lord, because all this is allegiance to your government. This has nothing to do with what God you serve. And so you're deceived into thinking, I can say Caesar is Lord, and I'll burn incense to Caesar, and I'll worship Caesar, just pledge my allegiance to my government, when really you were worshiping him. Maybe that's the idea. I'm not sure. But anyway, he gives the appearance that indeed he is leading people in the right direction. What I'm interested in at this juncture is verse 14 and 15. What is about this image of the beast? What do you see about the image? Say again? All right, came to light. Causes people on earth to make an image to the beast. Granted power to breathe to the image of the beast, and the image of the beast should both speak and cause many who would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. In other words, one of the ways of enforcing this worship is not just burning incense saying Caesar is Lord, but perhaps little idols of Domitian passed throughout the empire and enforced. This is one of the ways of having emperor worship. Now, interesting at verse 16, and he causes all, both great and small, rich and poor, and free and slave, to receive the mark on their hand or on their forehead. I don't take that to be a literal mark, but those who bow to the beast, in essence, get a mark, and those who don't have that mark, finish my sentence. They're going to be persecuted. Look at verse 17. No one may... What does that suggest?
I think those who worship the beast will have all these rights and things they can do. Those who don't will be persecuted in ways that they can't buy or sell.
Yeah. One writer, Ray Summers, says, worshiping the emperor was a test at every phase of life. In other words, this wasn't just a matter, are you going to burn incense to Caesar? but again, I'm quoting Summers, it attested every phase of life. Christians were boycotted in the market for refusal to bear the mark of the emperor. Marriage settlements, wills, transfers of property, none of these were legal without the stamp of the emperor. So can you imagine? I refuse to bow down before Caesar. I won't lead a rebellion against the government, but I'm not going to say Caesar is Lord. You don't receive whatever identification so that now you can go to the court and get things settled, or that you can go to the market and buy and purchase. So your faithfulness to the Lord impacted every aspect of your life. There were tentacles that went in every direction. Now, our time is about gone, so I've got to get now to verse 18. This number 666. Here is the wisdom. Let him who understands calculate the number of the beast, for it's the number of a man. His number is 666. Now, in apocalyptic literature, numbers have significance. We've talked about the number 7 being the number complete. 6 is just shy of 7, short of 7, and thus it's evil or failure. You're incomplete. Haley suggests that taking that number, failure, raising it to 666, a multiple number, that it may suggest the idea that evil is raised to the highest level, or it may suggest failure, failure, failure. In other words, whatever he's talking about, let's take verse 18 away. What was the point? What is the point? Let's get ahead of ourselves. What's the point of the chapter? The point of the chapter is that Rome, which is an ally of Satan, is going to fail. This beast that rose out of the sea, the Roman Empire, the Roman emperor, and all of his tools and arms of the Roman government is going to ultimately fail. There's going to be victory, the victory of the Lamb in chapter 14. They're merely tools of Satan, and God is going to conquer over Satan. So now let's bring verse 18 back in. What is the 666? It's the number of a man. It's not the number of God, it's the number of man. And so it is failure. And so you say, well, I think when you get through with your 666, you're going to come back to the end and the failure and the collapse and the unsuccessful efforts of Rome to destroy the woman that we saw in chapter 12. Make sense? It is not some number that if you see that written somewhere that it's sending the wrong number or sign. Or if you receive a package in the mail and it's number 666, you're doomed. Or if your check number is 666, something is bad. This was a number for failure. It's just simply Rome is going to fail. The Lamb is going to be victorious, chapter 14. Make sense? Questions or comments?
Can you help us see the power and the authority and limits that Satan has is helpless?
Even the deceptive signs, God does not cause, but God allowed. He allowed it in Exodus 7. He allowed it in Matthew 24, 2 Thessalonians 2. He allows it here. So whatever power Satan has, God allows him to have that. But he doesn't cause that. But he is powerful. Chapter 14 next time.